everyone, and welcome to the Maryland Center for History and Culture's virtual program, Coffee Klatch, Questions with MCHC. This virtual program is part of our first ever annual Member Celebration Week. My name is Hilary Chiang, and I'm the Director of Individual Giving here at MCHC. In my role, I partly oversee our membership department. Earlier this year, we sent out a member survey, and we had the highest survey participation we have had in the last 5 years. Thank you so much to everyone who participated and shared feedback. Your feedback is crucial information for us to know. We want to make sure we are doing the things you love and that we make sure to introduce new benefits, events, programs, and improvements that mean the most to you. One comment that came through clearly from the survey was that you all want more virtual programs, more in-person programs now that they are safe again, and more access to our staff. We hope that by creating the Member Celebration Week, many of these requests are fulfilled. And for our program today, we hope to provide answers to your questions about MCHC, our staff, our projects and initiatives, and our goals. Today, I'm joined by 3 other MCHC staff members, and I will lead us through a conversation to answer your questions. With me here today is Allison Tolman, our Vice President of Collections and Interpretation, Katie Caljean, our Vice President of Education and Strategic Engagement, and Catherine Mayfield, our France Merrick Director of the H. Furlong Baldwin Library. If you have any questions or comments during our program today, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of our screen. We have a lot of topics to dive into, so I'm going to get started right away. One question that I always get asked and love asking others is, how did you end up in your current role? I think that especially for museum professionals, and because museums encompass many areas of expertise from philanthropy to collections and education and library and publications and marketing, the list really goes on. The road to a museum job is often not a straight line. So I'd love to start by asking all of you, what is your background? What are your professional and personal interests? And how did you end up at your current role at MCHC? Allie, I will throw it to you to start first.
Like so many, I took a very meandering path to get to my current role. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree from the University of Delaware, I was actually an art conservator, painting specifically. I worked in New Orleans post-Katrina to treat a number of paintings that were damaged in the hurricane and deal with the aftermath of the hurricane. Then I kind of wanted to get back into the museum field from the private field, and I worked at the Smithsonian Institution for a number of years. First at the Museum Conservation Institute, continuing my role in paintings conservation. And then I started to want to learn more about the museum as a whole. So I got my master's from Hopkins in museum studies to focus on collection management. And from there, I came to the then Maryland Historical Society, now Maryland Center for History and Culture. I was actually the registrar at first, and then I was the associate curator of the Fashion Archives and chief registrar, director of collections. Now here I am, the vice president of collections and interpretation. So I kind of functioned as the umbrella over museum, library, and imaging services, as well as our exhibition programming. So I've been a little bit of everywhere, but a love for historical objects has been a key part of my life since college.
Yeah, definitely. From paintings to fashion and everything.
To fashion.
Thank you. Katie, how about you?
So my background actually started out in anthropology and archaeology, still thinking about the stuff, the objects, material culture. That's really where my heart is. I got my bachelor's from Drew University in Northern New Jersey. I'm originally from New Jersey, specifically focusing on Latin American archaeology and ceramic technology. So I've done a lot of field work. I've done field work in Ecuador, Peru, Arizona, Wyoming. I've worked with the Park Service and the Forest Service to do survey work. So I do really love getting my hands dirty and doing things. But being a shovel bum is a tough go, and trying to find funding for each of your projects as you go to support your your life. So I always have loved museums, and I ended up getting my master's degree in museum anthropology, which is a very specific type of museum degree, from Columbia University in New York City, which is a joint program with the American Museum of Natural History. So a lot of our courses were taught by different curators or collections managers throughout the institution, which was really great hands-on experience. And I'm a hands-on person, so I really didn't want to be in it like a theoretical classroom. I wanted to like actually be able to apply the things that we were learning. My husband is from Maryland, and we relocated here shortly after I got my my master's degree, and I found the Maryland Historical Society. I actually knocked on the door first as a museum teacher. I had some museum education experience. I love sharing object stories and getting people excited about the stuff. So that was kind of my entry point in. And from there, I've had so many different roles within this organization. I've done private events, I've worked in advancement, I oversaw visitor services, I've done public programming. And so I've had different pieces over time. And currently now I oversee multiple departments similarly to Allie, where I'm overseeing K through 12, public programming, our outreach and community engagement, our marketing and communications, and our academic publications. All of these like outward facing ways that we're engaging with the public and getting people excited about our mission and what we do. It's a really nice combination of departments, kind of like what you were saying, Hilary. There's a lot of surprising departments, I think, for some people that they may not realize, or even museum jobs, right? And I'm grateful that I had an entry point through advancement, because I never would have thought that was a career path as a student in college or in even in grad school. It's really not something that people are exposed to. So I appreciate like Allie dabbling in a lot of different departments within a cultural organization.
And you're still doing field work, just in a different kind of field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Still getting my hands dirty.
Wonderful. Kate, how about you?
So as a librarian and archivist, it's not surprising. I've always been enamored by books and the written word. So I studied as an undergraduate at NYU, journalism and mass communications with minors in English and American literature and psychology. And I worked in the publishing field for a few years out of college. I was a writer and editor, really enjoyed that work. And this is pre-children, so I found myself with some extra time on my hands when I had moved cross country to the West Coast. And I started volunteering at my local public library as a way to integrate into the local community, and had considered going back to school for library science. So I absolutely loved being in the library setting, and I decided that's what I wanted to do full time. So I went back to school, got my master's in library science at San Jose State University in Northern California, and then made the career switch. There's, I think, between all of us, a really strong message that's going to come through about dabbling in different areas and kind of volunteering, reaching out to try to get a sense of what different work and tasks are like in different departments. So I've worked in circulation, I worked in our children's department, worked at the front desk for reference, did cataloging, all kinds of, pretty much every kind of work you can do in a library. But I've really found my passion working with historical and archival collections, and have after that worked in government archives as well for NASA. But yeah, absolutely love working with historical collections. They are sort of, managing them is kind of like managing a small institution in themselves. There's so much there in taking care of collections and working with researchers and developing programming, working with students, giving tours. So all of those things keep us busy. And I love the kind of change in, whatever you think about librarianship, I find it an exciting, busy sort of job and role. So that is what brought me to librarianship. And I came home back to Maryland and found my way to the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Feel very, very lucky to be here. It's an incredible collection.
Well, we feel lucky to have you, certainly. Much like all three of you, I also had a meandering path. My background is in fine and decorative art. I actually have my master's in fine and decorative art from Sotheby's Institute. My original plan was to be a curator or collections manager. I love the stuff, that's why we're all here. We love the material objects and learning about people through them and our past histories. But I think that's sort of what brought me to fundraising too, is I love people and I love connecting with them and seeing what they connect to at our organization. But Allie, back to you. You are really a fashion historian, even though you got your start as a painting conservation. Fashion is your first love, right? Or maybe your second love.
Yeah, maybe my second love. So the reason I got into conservation, really, we go to museums, but I want to get up close. I want to see how it ticks. That has always been sort of like, can't touch the paintings. Like I can, because I can fix it. Getting to revive these pieces of art was always what I loved. And when I came to the Maryland Center for History and Culture, I started to dive into our fashion collection, which had been sort of not used in a long time. My predecessor, Alexandra Deutsch, she started to revive it. And my conservation background, when I came in, I was like, we can solve this. We can rehab this collection. And when you get into clothing, like paintings, getting up close is so cool. And in painting and being a part of that artwork is amazing. But when you look at a piece of clothing, it's so intimate. When I'm looking at a piece of clothing from like the 19th century and I can see where she has spilled her wine, like it's a wedding dress, I see her champagne spill, or you see where somebody has let down a hem because they gave something to your sister. We have one where the woman had scoliosis and there's extra padding. Like it's so intimate when you're looking at the seams of a dress. It's such a great way to learn history at a very personal level. And so I just became enthralled with that. And that's really why I love fashion history, because when you're talking about the Revolutionary War and, you see objects, guns, things like that, you can definitely learn history that way. But when you see the dress of a woman who missed an inaugural ball because she was too pregnant to be deemed decent, and she has an unfinished hem on her elbow because she didn't see the point in finishing the dress, that's amazing. That's history to me that you relate to. And so that's really why I became enthralled with fashion and telling history through clothing. Of course, I love all of our collections. I don't have favorites, but I love fashion history as a teaching tool for, making history approachable and so intimate and personal connections with people.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I love hearing you lecture on fashion, because the way you were able to weave stories together and build the picture of a person and their life and the experiences they had is it's just so much fun.
Thank you. That's what I like to do. I love making history relatable. I think when we grow up and we learn history, it seems like a memorization thing, but having that relatable experience is like something I love creating and trying to make it approachable and memorable for each person.
Katie and Kate, I'm curious if you all are drawn to a particular collection at MCHC as Allie is drawn to our fashion archives. I know it's a tough question.
I would say not a particular collection, but I like how our collections interplay with one another. So for example, there are many things that we have within our, that might be in a museum collection, but then there's supporting documents in the library. And by piecing them together, you do get the more complete picture, kind of what Allie is saying. Like oftentimes we do have the documents that support the stories that we want to tell. So it's like we have that complete picture and multiple perspectives, and it allows us to make the objects come to life in a way that we couldn't if we just had like a singular object or a singular collection. So I don't know. I really think like if we had like, for example, like a letter, a Civil War letter that has tear stains on it. And then we also have the mourning dress that the woman would have worn. It just kind of like completes the circle and just makes like that moment more real. Kind of like what Allie's saying, like making it like something that you can relate to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it is really hard to pick favorites in the library. I feel this kind of emotion almost and power in getting to work with primary source materials. Ali and Katie have talked about, some of the evidence of people wearing, using materials at different times in history. And so you see that and sometimes in holding something in your hands. And there's that great informational content that you're taking in and learning about different historical eras. But then there's also that very personal aspect. And this realization of, this one item, this piece of paper was written centuries ago, and it's still here. And imagining that person sitting, writing, and the hands that it's passed through, I find that really, really powerful. In terms of some of the collections that I find myself more drawn to, I love early photography. I think that there is so much to explore within it. We have an incredible collection of early daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, tintypes, cased photographs, and there's a really an art and a science to those materials, as well as so many stories within. So there's sometimes very, very small items, but so much is packed within them. The other one I have to mention is absolutely love oral history collections. So these are, this is a discipline that preserves the voices and stories of individuals and communities. And oftentimes within archives, oral history has historically documented people whose stories have not necessarily been written and saved on paper. And so it's a really wonderful way to give voice and color to history. And I think it's an incredible way for people to access history too. Ali talked about how sometimes, as young students, history, when I grew up, was often about memorization, and to learn about history through people's personal experiences, I think is really incredible and wonderful.
Yeah, you get to experience and understand a very personal view, and then also put it in the larger context of the subject, which is a really great way to study history. And a lot of our oral histories are available on our website, right, Kate?
We've got a couple. We're building the website with. We're going to be making more available, and we've been doing a grant project this year that is going to be digitizing hundreds of oral histories. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Katie, I think you've done just about every job at MCHC. As you mentioned, from event planning to advancement and education, you really do have an incredible vantage point to look at MCHC as a whole. I think you joined us in 2012. Since then, what has been the most satisfying or exciting project that you've been able to work on?
So I would say that this is coming in with like an advancement lens. So our first screen studio was the seed of an idea from a site visit at another organization that had a small version of what we currently have. And I said to our then director of development, we need one. If our task is to serve the state and beyond, get way beyond our walls, we'll never be able to do that if we're expecting people to travel over an hour to come see us. Yeah, we'll get the occasional and we'll serve the people that are directly surrounding us in person. But if we really want to be able to be a statewide organization, we need to be able to do distance learning. And this was back in like 2013 that we saw that. And so we put together a proposal, we got the funding, made it happen, hired the appropriate staff to figure out how to do that. And this was a time before people knew what Zoom was and what technology we needed to purchase to build out that space and to develop the programming and to develop the concepts and to work with teachers to identify what would actually be useful in their classrooms, like what sorts of lessons are they interested in. It really doesn't make sense for us to invent something that nobody wants to use. So it was a period of exploration and like pushing ourselves into a realm that we really didn't know much about. But now, come the pandemic, we're set up, we're ready to go. And so we finally have seen like the fruits of our labor, and we are able to serve the state. We reach every county. We are in like 15 states a year, like beyond Maryland, for our programming. And all of the programming is set up to be inquiry driven. So it's a live conversation with students. It highlights our collections, which we really felt strongly that we needed to be able to provide access to all the awesome things that we have. It enables students to assess primary sources, to build arguments, and to work collaboratively together within their classroom to like figure things out, because history is something you do, right? Like it's that hands-on, like active. History didn't happen. It's something that we're doing. The past happened. We are actively interpreting history in the present, and we all could be part of it. So empowering students to think that way. And so we're actually about to embark on, it's in progress, a second studio so that we can serve even more students across the state and the country and internationally within a reasonable time zone. So it's growing. And so that it all started from this seed, from this visit, an advancement visit, that we got an idea and we built on it. And it positioned us to be ready for this moment that nobody anticipated would ever happen. But we were ready to leverage our tools. And then from that, like since we were so comfortable with Zoom and being able to produce digital content, our public programs, our pivot for the spring of 2020 wasn't too much of an uphill battle because we had some groundwork already laid. And so we've moved our public programming into the virtual realm as well. And like we're reaching people that we never would have reached before. So it really feels satisfying that we were able to explore that, have the permission to dream, right? Like this is a cool idea. Like how do we get it off the ground? And actually now seeing the fruits of our labor.
Yeah, that's incredible. I had never heard the background story of how the virtual field trip studios started. Mm-hmm. And can you describe a little bit about what a virtual field trip is for those who don't know it? Because it's a really neat concept.
So they're available to any teachers K to 12, and we basically just need to have a camera on the other side, which we have a fleet of them that we can send out if a teacher doesn't have access to the technology. And it's an hour-long lesson with one of our educators on site at MCHC in the studio. We have a green screen so that it's a little bit of like a meteorologist situation where you could see things that are happening on the screen behind them. We have a really cool document camera that allows us to explore primary sources or objects to get up close. And like I was mentioning, everything is driven by inquiry. So it's a two-way conversation, call and response with students, getting them thinking, getting them off their feet in the classroom. And the teacher helps facilitate that dialogue with the classroom. And they all meet standards, so like teachers can feel like they're checking a box. It's not just something that is like entertaining for the classroom, but it's actually helping them achieve their job as well. So all of the lessons, the descriptions for the different types of programs are available on our website if anybody's interested in checking out more in terms of the topics that we offer.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Allie, you joined MCHC, I think it was in 2014, right? Just 2 years after Katie. And then Kate, you joined in 2019, which is about a year before I joined. I'm wondering both for you, Allie and Kate, what has been one of the most exciting or satisfying projects that you've been able to be a part of?
I have a couple. Oh, it's been 6 years. So
big question. It's a big question.
So the Fashion Archives was obviously a huge thing. It was 5 years of my 6 years. Rehabilitating that collection, growing it, even getting it digitized, getting it out there, talking to designers, talking to students. We have, kind of ushering in the next generation of fashion historians and conservators. We have a great annual internship where they can come in and learn, and they go on to do great things. And it's I'm very proud of that. Not only because we've got all this material that was put away in the 70s, obviously didn't make it into a digital database. So just making it accessible so people know what we have, that has been huge. And again, fashion being such a connector, it's been just a wonderful way to reach out to the community, to connect with different organizations, different groups, designers, students, fashion brands. I mean, Bishmi Cromartie was part of our exhibition. It's been great, that collection as a tool, as a connector. So I would say definitely the Fashion Archives, just establishing it and teaching the next generation is something I'm really proud of, and very satisfying part of my career. The other thing is kind of part of that professional development. We have the ability to help smaller institutions at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and it's one of my favorite things that we get to do. We helped usher in the legislation for abandoned cultural property. And we were one of like 4 states that didn't have any legislation to help museums grapple with material that is left at the doorstop. Basically, we have to treat it like any object because we don't have abandoned cultural property for museums. So we established a procedure to help claim title so that we can treat those objects, because if we don't have that title, I can't conserve something, I can't lend it, I can't exhibit it. And after we created that legislation, or helped to create that legislation, the University of Delaware was a wonderful partner in helping us create that legislation because they had done the same thing. But afterward, we did a video program, a virtual program, and we still get calls, emails from institutions saying, can you help us understand this part of the legislation? How do we do this? What does this mean? That's a great way that, we can help smaller institutions that may be entirely volunteer run or just don't have the capacity to dive in as deep as we can. We also like to help with questions about conservation, collection storage needs. I love being a resource to other institutions, connecting them, bringing them in, providing platforms, bring them into exhibitions to tell their story. That's really one of my favorite things that we do as the Maryland Center for History and Culture. I love that sort of, not really professional development, but just helping smaller institutions. I'd love to one day have like an angel project, which is what I did in conservation. It's kind of what we do now, where we help other institutions, but in conservation, you basically go in and help restore one collection or analyze one collection, do condition reports and tell them how to store things. I love being able to do that kind of thing. So as we do it, or as we're capable of doing it now, is a really satisfying part of my job.
Yeah, it's, a great community building opportunity as well.
For sure, I'd agree from the library and archival. That community aspect is really rewarding. Getting to work with other archivists, librarians in the region. There's some wonderful organizations here, the Maryland History and Culture Collaborative, Oral History in the Mid-Atlantic region, MARAC, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference. So myself, a number of my colleagues are involved in various organizations and contributing to those, but also, they're a great way for us to bring back to our own organization. So that's wonderful. Something else that I've found really rewarding here is working on grant projects. That is a big part of our work. I really enjoy kind of the grants cycle process, because there's in-depth getting to know collections. We received a Save America's Treasures grant for conservation of our daguerreotype collection, for example. So initially there's really in-depth kind of analysis of a particular collection and proposing what is that need that exists there, getting to work with project partners, conservators, and others to see that work through, and then making it accessible. So that is at the heart of our work: preservation and access. And I find these projects a really great way to, highlight our collections too. There are so many wonderful collections here. So gives them, great care behind these collections as well as greater visibility too.
Yeah, and with a library of, what is it, over 7 million items, there's lots of history to preserve and make accessible. Kate, I was thinking, when a lot of people think of libraries, I think people still think of, paper and books and the Dewey Decimal System that we all learned about in elementary school. But the libraries of today really are digital tools and they're digital resources. Can you talk a little bit about how our H. Furlong Baldwin Library, how we bridge that gap between the physical and digital world?
Yeah, so that has been something that's been really exciting over this last year or more even. We launched last fall 2 new platforms, a new finding aids database. So finding aids are guides into collections. Sometimes archival collections can be really large and it can be difficult to find out where do you even begin with one. So a finding aid is that guide to an overall scope of a collection, and then typically there are inventories at a box or folder level to help you locate what it is that you might be most interested in. So that was a really big endeavor, taking all of the content guides that we had into collections and having them in one place that's now available online and searchable across collections. So you'll find that on our website. And then in addition, we also launched a new digital collections portal. So this is a fantastic place to, whether you're near or far, find some of the treasures within the Maryland Center for History and Culture's collection. And so you can do keyword searching and filtering to explore there. And it's just a sampling because like you said, Hilary, the library's collection is some 7 million items. So it's really a small sampling, but ever growing. So when I think about that kind of digital access, there are different kinds of materials there. There are many photographs, museum objects. You're starting to find more paper documents that you can page through as PDFs, some oral histories as well, and that'll be growing. But when I think about that digital access, it's not just through digital collections, but also the digitization that we do very much impacts educational programming, and materials are used in public programs, and they're used in teacher resources and materials that are available online through the education portal there. There's something called HIP, which is the Historical Investigations Portal, virtual field trips that Katie was talking about. So there are all these great ways that materials get out of the library and out into classrooms and into the world.
That kind of speaks to what Katie brought up earlier, is how our collections and all of our departments really relate to each other and build off of each other in order to create a more holistic and view or meaningful experience with their resources. I think the whole world would pretty much agree that the word of 2020 was pivot. I think every department everywhere had to figure out how to go more digital and more virtual in order to still provide engagement for audiences. Katie and Allie, can you both speak to a little bit how you all in education and museum pivoted to go more digital?
Yeah, so I mentioned before with our virtual field trips, like being ready to launch and push that out as an option. It was a little bit challenging though, because students were no longer in a classroom. So we needed to figure out how to do a virtual field trip with students in their individual homes and managing whether or not they're muted or if they're using the chat function. So that was a little bit of a growing pain because it changed the format slightly, but still great that we had it as a resource. We transformed our public programming into virtual public programs, which we did pretty quickly. It took a good month to work out the kinks, but once we were sailing, we were doing 2 to 3 a month, which is wonderful, and having conversations rather than lectures, just trying to have a dialogue, not only with our our members and our supporters and everybody out there, but within the field, within the room, right? We wanted to have people with multiple perspectives. So we've kind of changed the format of how maybe a traditional program in our lecture hall would be formatted. And in some ways it's nice to shake that up and to be thinking about programs in a different way, even going back into an environment where we're going to be able to see people again. And then the third thing I would say is Kate was talking about the historical investigations portal, and that was something for a long time teachers within a school district would have access to, because we wanted it to integrate with our learning management system, like a Blackboard or a Canvas or Moodle, so we could track usage. And so we had a few relationships with a handful of school districts that were using HIP, but the moment that we went into quarantine, we decided to make all of our lessons available through public access links. So anybody in the country, anybody who finds our website can access these lessons. And so we saw it as an asset that we had, and why limit the people that could have access, back to this word access to our lessons and our collections, and providing useful tools to teachers within difficult, it was like the hardest year ever for teachers. So like, we want to be helpful, we want to be useful. And then also just leveraging other asynchronous materials that we might have, like video content, like we had some things in the bank, but we created some new things based on the feedback that we were getting from teachers to be able to, again, share our stories and our collections with students. So it was a learning curve, but I think all for the better. And even now, we'll continue with many of these resources because they are useful. And the pandemic kind of forced us to try, which we're grateful for.
Definitely.
So yeah, pivot was definitely the word. I'm collections and interpretation. I am objects and I am exhibits. So when everyone is locked in their house, those two things become pretty difficult. One of the things that we did very quickly, in fact, I think we were one of the first, certainly on the East Coast, one of the first, if not in the nation, was to create this collecting in quarantine initiative. And what that did is, like, we aren't open, you can't bring us your stories, but you can tell us your stories, because we're living in a historical moment. And your stories may seem like, I had people tell me, like, I mean, I'm in my house, it's not a story. And it's like, yeah, but in 100 years, when someone is going through something, they can look at your story about how you were frustrated that you were out of toilet paper. And you can say, like, I'm going through this now. And this happened to someone 100 years ago. Because whenever something happens today, the first thing we do is we look to history and we try to contextualize what's happening and say, like, with what had happened before. So our Collecting in Quarantine initiative, which is still going on as things open up, because we want to know what you're going through as things open up, how you're feeling, what you're experiencing. You can find it on our website, but that was how we reached out to people. And then after, and Kate's team was crucial in this, after we collected the stories, we were putting them out weekly, sometimes bi-week, like twice a week, so that people could see the stories and be like, I'm not alone, because we were all alone, you know, or at least if you live alone, you may have been alone. So this was a great way for us to reach out across the state and connect everyone with something we were all living in. So that's one of the ways we pivoted. For exhibitions, the way we pivoted is, as Katie mentioned, we did virtual public programs to talk about the material. Our fashion exhibition, you know, opened in October of 2019. So it was wildly successful until we doors in March. But we were able to do a couple of virtual programs that involved the fashion community, that either it's a lecture that I could give on fashion history, or we connected people who were in the fashion gala and have them have a conversation about the changing world of fashion. That was sort of how we were able to interpret a narrative virtually. So those are sort of the two avenues that we use to create collections and interpretations in this new digital world.
Allie, also another exhibition pivot.
Oh, the virtual exhibition.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, that is sure. Katie. And Katie's education team was crucial to that. One of the things we do now that I'm really proud of is that our exhibitions are not just curators pushing forth content. It's actually a cross-functional team that has members of the education, museum, and library teams working together to create something. And one of our first collaborative exhibitions was our voting rights exhibition. This was supposed to open in the summer of 2020 to go with the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the 19th and 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment. So talking about voting rights, we wanted to hit those anniversaries, and it would only really be pertinent until the election. So we were really looking at a window of July through December, January inauguration. And of course, the pandemic covered that entire block of time. Nobody was going to be able to come into our museum. We didn't even know if our doors would be open in that time period. So we pivoted to creating a virtual experience. And the challenge there was, how do you make something that people could interact with? Because our exhibit was supposed to be highly interactive. You were supposed to step into the shoes of someone throughout history and learn when you gained, lost, and regained, or how long it took you to first gain the right to vote in America. So we really had to make that virtual, and we were able to do it with some really creative work. Mission Media helped us produce it. And so that when you access the website, you're automatically given a voter ID, and that affects your experience within the virtual exhibition. But that was a major thing that we had to do as soon as we shut down again, make that decision to switch it to a virtual platform.
And Pivot, you did well across all departments. It's, 2020 almost seems like a lifetime ago, but we really were able to accomplish so much, and it was through, collaborative teamwork, and it's really great to hear you all talk about it. I'd like to end with two questions. One is the hardest question we all get, which I'm sure you all already know. Then the other comes from my days as a camp counselor, which is another one of my favorite questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite object or item in our collection? I'll give you a second to think about it. Anyone have an answer?
What's yours, Hilary?
I think that honestly, I'll say one of my favorites is actually our Baltimore album quilts. It was one of the first exhibitions and items that I got to interact with when I started this job in March of 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. I like the Baltimore album quilts because of their colors and the symbolism that's in them and how they were so important to the women and the families. And it was just really incredible to learn about them.
It's a wonderful, women's history document. They think of it as an arts and craft movement, but it is a amazing bit of women's history. I'm sorry, this is a historian in me. I'm gonna tidbits of fun information. But the album quilts, the fact that each woman made a square sometimes and would contribute to a greater thing. It's such a wonderful capture of a moment in time. I love those two. I'll do my favorite, which is always changing. And I think that on the record, I don't have a favorite object. I like all of our objects equally because I oversee all the objects. But one of my favorite stories, I mentioned earlier in the Fashion Archives, we have this wonderful dress that was supposedly worn to Washington's inaugural ball. But one of the sleeves was never finished. And when dressing it, we noticed that she was pregnant. And it may have been that she was too indecent to actually go to the inaugural ball, which would explain the unfinished sleeve. It's a bit of conjecture. It's a gorgeous 18th century survival. And the family, when they gave it to us, actually recorded the genealogical history on this entire collection. It's about 300 objects. So that's an amazing story. What I really love about it is when we got it, it opens in the front and you would wear a petticoat that would show underneath. And we're like, oh, it's a shame those don't survive. They're usually quilted silk petticoats and the silk just won't survive. But we found when we were going through the collection, a beautiful quilted silk 1920s cape. It turned out that somebody in the 1920s went up into the attic and found this beautiful quilted silk petticoat that went with this inaugural gown and made it into a cape that they could wear. So it's like this object has two lives. And we leave it as the 1920s piece because we don't want to rob history from that object. But we were able to match the color to create like a, make it an 18th century style petticoat to fit underneath the dress. But I just love that sort of multiple layers of history in that, in those objects. So that's one of my favorite because it's such a complicated object and such a cool family history.
Playing on this idea of like a history of a history, I really love the dioramas. Actually, I think they're so they capture your imagination, and there's always new details to see every time you look at them. But they are from a moment in time when people were trying to interpret the past. So it's like they in themselves are an exhibition of an exhibition. And so I really love the potential for those. And we do have plans to shine more light on those dioramas. And recently, one of our education team members has created a really cool interactive where we've animated some of the characters within the dioramas on a screen so that you could imagine whatever activity the characters within the diorama would be doing, whether they be like, churning butter or, waving. So it makes it alive. And so they're dated, but they're really interesting because they're dated. It's like that layering, like what you were just talking about, Allie.
Yeah, I dug into the history on those when we were reinstalling that gallery, and it is such a funny history in a history because, as Katie said, there's like details in the details. Well, a few dioramas were actually based on paintings or drawings in our collection, and there's this one that's based on our Loitza painting, which is fairly famous of the founding of Maryland, but it's incredibly romanticized. And we have documentation of like historians talking to the fabricators and arguing and being like, here's why the painting's wrong. March in Maryland, there are no beautiful green leaves on trees. It is still cold here. And them taking the leaves off of a tree when they make the diorama to make these sort of historical corrections. And it's really funny because it'll be like, your fire is too close to that house would catch on fire. There's no way. Yep. So watching historians have this battle with pieces in our collection to create new artwork to show history.
That now we're looking at again, and like, well, I don't know. So it's just like constant reinterpretation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Conversation with history.
Mm-hmm.
So from the library, I'd say, like Allie, it's really, really difficult to pick a favorite item, but something that has always stuck with me is the feeling of seeing some primary source documents and working with them in person. And one really powerful experience was seeing for the first time Benjamin Banneker's astronomical journal, which is one of the great treasures in the collection here at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. So Banneker was born in 1731, died in 1806, and he is one of the first African Americans really recognized in our country for his scientific contributions. And in our collection, we have his astronomical journal. So it's a journal that documents astronomical calculations, mathematical equations, but much more than that beyond there's also his dreams and nightmares and his kind of philosophical musings. And it's a really incredible piece thinking about archives. We've talked a lot about the humanities and stories, but it's also this evidence of science and scientific achievement. It's a really unique national story and a local story, a really personal one too. So I love all these layers to it. But I do remember seeing it for the very first time in person. And we talked about earlier kind of that feeling of thinking about Banneker in person, writing his observations out, documenting his dreams, and that this item has been saved. He after his death, actually, the day of his funeral, his home burned down. And so his documents, materials within his house were destroyed. But this is one of very few surviving materials documenting his life. So it's just a very, very powerful piece, and it's definitely one of the favorites in the collection.
And he also was one of the first to record, at least that we know about, cicadas, right? And they
Yeah.
emerged in Maryland. And
Yep, one of the first to record the 17-year cycle, and that is less known about Banneker. But one thing I should mention there too is that the journal is fully digitized. It's available on our digital collections, so that can be explored, as well as his other observations and musings in the journal. So you'll find that on the digital collections.
it's so neat. I didn't realize that he recorded his dreams and nightmares too. That's such a personal thing that we all do today still, right? Wonder about our dreams and nightmares. So my final question is more of a silly one, but also very important. If you were a shoe, what kind of shoe would you be and why? I'll go first. If I was a shoe, I think I would be a fabulous velvet loafer. Practical, comfortable, but still with some color and pizzazz.
I would be some sort of heel, but with a steel toe, because I'm fashionable. I'm into fashion, so maybe something vintagey. But because I have to care for the collection, I've got to have a hard edge to preserve and our collection.
I would say I'm a sandal because you could dress it up or dress it down. It's functional. It can be outdoors. And it's a like a utilitarian kind of shoe.
I think there's a connecting thread between all these and probably with mine too. So don't laugh about this one, but I'd say I'm a clog. Just that definitely functional edge or practicality to them. And in the archives, we are doing lots of things, running around, literally climbing up ladders sometimes, cleaning in the archives. And so that practical aspect is necessary, but clogs are making a stylish comeback, and we serve multiple purposes on the front end. And so that mix of practicality and a little bit of style there.
Yeah. Necessary in any shoe.
I think my shoe would be fabric covered, like Claire McCardle used to have fabric cover her shoes. She's an amazing American designer. Used to have the fabric on the shoes match the dress. I would do that. But I still want the steel toe for
important detail.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. It has been such a treat chatting with you and learning a bit more about you. So thank you again. And thank you to all of our members and donors for exploring and preserving Maryland's history with us. Bye.